What happens when a world-class nutritionist uses blood panels, cellular biology, and fact-based science to create and monitor healthy eating plans with supplements for her clients? Everyone wins. Welcome to Power on Your Plate with Haylie Pomroy, an educational experience that gives you both the actionable and practical tools you can use every day to get your health, weight, and life back on track.
Hi guys, it's Haylie Pomroy here, your nutritionist, your wellness expert, and just a person sitting here thinking about you guys all the time and ideas and ways that we can kind of help you in your metabolism. And one thing that's been coming up a lot lately is how allergies affect weight loss. And a lot of people that are dealing with allergies seem to be finding that their weight loss has stalled, they've hit a plateau, it's maybe slowed down some. And people are really struggling right now with kind of how to make that connection. What's going on in the metabolism? What happens in the metabolism? And why the scale and the Kleenex box seem to somehow go together. Today, I gathered a few people that are very close to me that have access to me, whether it's over dinner or in a team meeting or in a social gathering. They seem to be asking me a lot of questions about what's going on in their bodies. And I really feel like as a community, we can learn a lot through personal struggles, personal triumphs, and really in sharing our experiences. So a couple of things I just wanted to science geek out with you for a second and talk about a few kind of science facts around allergies. And then I'm going to pull all of these amazing people in here to ask me questions and ask me anything. But let's all get on the same page here first. First and foremost, I want to make sure that you all recognize and realize that allergies are an imbalanced response in the immune system. So we have this big, strong immune response, and we sometimes call it reactivity. I think right now people are learning more about their immune systems than they ever have, which is cool and exciting and fun. But let me distill it down that this reactivity is supposed to be kind of a sacred reactivity. Times when you're exposed to a virus or a venom like a snake bite or a bacteria or parasitic exposure, or even a chemical exposure or a heavy metal toxin. We're supposed to have this response or this reactivity in the body that tells our immune system to attack or target or flush out rapidly this negative thing that we've been exposed to. Oftentimes with things like adrenal fatigue, you're exhausted, you've had immune stress or immune stimulus, like even with a recent vaccine, that's an immune stimulus. Maybe you're someone that struggles with an autoimmune disorder, or you've had a lot of environmental exposures, maybe a moldy building, or you got into just had the house painted, a new couch, a new bed. Sometimes the body can become imbalanced in dealing with those immune responses, and it can start to secrete immune hormones to things that should be considered safe, right? Safe things like pet hair and grass and pollens and trees. The immune system becomes confused. And a confused message starts to trigger response in certain areas of the body. So I just want to make sure that we all are together before we start kind of talking about questions and people's bodies specifically, that any kind of an allergy is an immune response. It's different, like a food allergy is different than a food sensitivity. This is truly an immune response. This immune response primarily takes place in these cells called mast cells. And mast cells all over the body, but they kind of conjugate around the lining of the lungs and the GI tract, just under the surface of the skin. There's a lot of them in the nose and the throat and in the mouth. And this is why we see like common allergy responses will manifest in those areas, right? We have runny noses, swollen eyes, maybe a difficult breathing, maybe hives or things like that. That's because those cells that are in those areas, they actually secrete a hormone called histamine. And histamine it's a chemical compound. It's natural in the body, secreted all day, every day. It's part of our adaptogenic hormone profile. So like how we adapt, because all day long we're exposed to viruses and bacteria and chemicals, especially in our current environment, right? Cleaning chemicals, food chemicals. So we are constantly secreting histamine. just like we constantly secrete cortisol, it's just all about keeping it in balance so that it doesn't go out of control and create this allergy response. You have heard about the word histamine from commercials for allergy medications. They say histamine blockers. Maybe some last 12 hours, maybe some last 24 hours, maybe some are quick acting, some are slow acting. But I want you guys to think about it as this chemical compound, this natural chemical compound the body secretes in these really targeted areas. And two things I want you to think about with histamine is that it really can disrupt hormones that we call prostaglandins, which are all of our sex hormones. So like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, things that regulate blood sugar, glucocorticoids, things that regulate blood pressure, mineral corticoids. One of the reasons why we can have a blood pressure change with allergies. One of the reasons why we can have a blood sugar change with allergies. It also can disrupt how we utilize vitamin D. If you're having a lot of allergies, you might find when you go get your labs run that you have a significant vitamin D deficiency. The other thing that histamine really affects is insulin and our ability to take blood sugars into the cell to be metabolized. So it can really slow the metabolism because we become insulin resistant when histamine levels become too high. The other real kicker here is, like I said, our bodies are constantly secreting histamine, right? It's a natural thing that happens in our body. It's one of the protection mechanisms that we have that keep us healthy. When it becomes out of balance, we start to have these inflammatory symptoms. We start to have insulin resistance. And the primary way, really the majority of the way our body clears histamine, so it gets rid of any excess, is through a process called methylation. And I know that sounds like this big, hairy, scary word, but methylation we talk about a lot in our community because it's really how the liver takes things that are bad for us or in excess, breaks it down into something that we can secrete through our urine, our stool, our sweat, and our tears. So remember, the reason why we talk about methylation a lot in our community is because that regulates fat loss, fat-soluble toxin metabolism, and fat loss. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about a power plant that is constantly breaking down fat and fat-soluble toxins to get it out of the body, breaking down cholesterol, breaking down historical stored fat. And all of the sudden, because your immune system is having a strong reaction to something that should otherwise be safe, all of a sudden this power plant is monopolized by trying to flush out excess histamine. One of the first things that it does is it slows the metabolism of the fat, especially stored fat. Not as much fat that's consumed in the food, but stored fat. So we can see a pooling in cholesterol, we can see a pooling in triglycerides, we can see a pooling around our bellies and our hips and our thighs, simply because we have too much histamine in the body, because our mechanisms for creating histamine, our mechanisms for metabolizing histamine has gone awry. We call this an allergy syndrome, and it can definitely affect the scale. Given that information, I feel like my friends and my colleagues ask me a lot of questions about what's going on in their bodies. And I thought we should all get together today and have them ask me some of these questions with you guys so that we can start to slowly unravel maybe some of the imbalances that are going on in your body. Kate, I'm going to call on you first. You can ask me anything around this allergy complex, around kind of what's going on in the body and how we can support it and how we can balance it.
Sure. Well, I just saw that you launched a vitamin C supplement.
Yes.
And, I usually use vitamin C during cold and flu season to keep me healthy and to help me try to avoid getting sick. Can you tell us how that would be, using vitamin C, how that would help us out in the springtime?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Let me start by saying it took us a very long time to find the raw ingredients and source what we felt was valuable in a vitamin C. A lot of my clients that are dealing with autoimmune disorders have serious health issues. One of the things that we do is IV vitamin C therapies. And the reason why we do it in IV form is because the majority of the supplements out there are corn derived in their vitamin C source. It's actually very, very hard in the United States to source a vitamin C that's not corn derived. And as you know, corn can be a catalyst for inflammation. Corn can be a catalyst for insulin imbalance. And corn itself promote histamine. It took us a very long time to find a tapioca base that we could get in a high enough concentrate and could be formulated in a way that could be easily delivered to the body. So vitamin C is a super important in the tissues that I talked about where mast cells are produced. Vitamin C is a nutrient that is really important to the GI lining, to the nasal passages, to the throat, to the collagen and elastin and fibrinogen that's just above the layers of the skin. So we want to think about this as nurturing those tissues that host the mast cells that we just talked about. So first and foremost, the more those tissues are nurtured, the more stable their response will be during allergy season. So vitamin C is, as you said, really well researched and really well adopted from an immune perspective. But when we look at allergy season, one of the reasons why we look at it at allowing a therapeutic level of vitamin C to be administered during allergy season is because it helps stabilize our body's mast cell response. I guess the best way, Caitlin, to say this is a phenomenal for allergies, right? It was really hard to get something that was clean and pure, and we're not going to do it if we can't do it neurotically perfect. So I'm very excited about this. But I want you to think about that vitamin C strengthens the tissues and nurtures the mast cells so that they can become more smart in their response to things that are dangerous, like viruses, and benign, like trees, grasses, weeds, pollens, cat hair. So it can really help when a person feels like their allergy response, they're like, now I'm reactive to everything. I don't even know what to avoid anymore. We want to strengthen the mast cells response. We want to make those mast cells super smart so that they don't create a huge, what we call cytokine storm. I know a lot of people are talking about that, especially with COVID, a huge immune response in the lungs, in the nose, in the eyes, in the mouth, and in the GI tract. I am very excited about that. I don't have to do my IV vitamin C's, which I typically do in the spring to really help my body not go into an autoimmune flare. So I was very, very excited about that. So thanks for asking. And Steve, I know that you have some interesting allergy questions that you've been asking me, and I've said, save it. Let's do it in front of our community.
Awesome. Thanks, Haylie. Well, listen, I don't know. I mean, feel really good. I'm really healthy thanks to all your great supplements. But just within the last year, and I'm not as young as it used to be, I just turned 64. Every morning when I get up, I sneeze for 15 or 20 minutes. I don't know what, my environment hasn't changed. I'm trying to sort of pinpoint what's going on. I mean, I know it's allergy season, but for me, this has been going on for the better part of a year. And then it subsides sort of mid-morning, and the rest of the day, I'm perfectly normal. But I'm just perplexed as to try to figure out why every morning I get up and it's a sneeze-a-thon around here at my house. So is there anything you can do or anything you have that can help me?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we want to think about. And this is great that you actually brought this up, because when I'm working with a client and we talk about allergies, a lot of times we try to really journal. And I say, is it worse at night? Is it worse midday? Is it worse first thing in the morning? And anytime we see something that's that distinctive, right? So you're saying right when you wake up, you just are having this huge histamine response. We want to look at the rhythms of the body and what's going on. So we have metabolism histamine, which has natural antihistamines, so it can help inhibit the body from producing a high level of histamine. And so you might try taking that like actually before bed, so more as from a preventative perspective. And that can really help with that. But it's fascinating when you say when you wake up first thing in the morning. And what we want to look at is when we wake in the morning, our body elevates cortisol, right, which is a natural steroid. It elevates cortisol, and our autonomic nervous system changes from a parasympathetic override to a sympathetic override. So let me distill that down for a second. We secrete wake-up hormones, right, in the morning. Those hormones are adaptive, right? So if you have to wake up and run out of the door for a meeting, you secrete more of those hormones. Maybe if it's a leisurely Sunday, you see actually your body, because of the knowledge base that it has and the brain cells and the way everything interacts, will say, I can wake up in a little more leisurely way. There's less adrenal secretion when you're kind of waking up leisurely. There's more adrenal secretion when you're waking up and you're having to jump out of bed, those fight and flight hormones. But in general, those flight and fight hormones are always secreted at a higher level earlier in the morning. One of the things that those can do is those can be what they call pro-inflammatory hormones, right? The same hormones that make you wake up and jump up are the same hormones that can secrete inflammation. So in your body, we want to reduce the body's histamine output. We'd probably do that more in the evening when you're in more what they call sympathetic tones. We'd probably even actually have you do like the 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C right before bed. Because again, it sounds like your mast cells are hyperreactive, right? When your body starts to secrete those wake hormones, it says wake up and have this huge immune response. What we want to do is we want to say wake up and have a nice morning, right? So I would probably combine those both. And I would probably in the beginning start in the evening. I would probably do a higher dose of the histamine in the evening and I have 3,000 of the vitamin C in the evening. And then I would do your regular dose of histamine first thing in the morning. What we want to do is saturate that tissue, and that vitamin C, I think, is going to be a key component so that your metabolism histamine can be more effective. Another little trick with the metabolism histamine is when you take it in the morning, take it with metabolism energy. Metabolism energy also has natural antihistamine in the form of quercetin, which is a plant extract. It's a bioflavonoid, but it has amino acids that help increase the rate of supplement delivery into the tissue. So like I'm going to give this to you one more time. So we have in your metabolism histamine, we have herbs that help tell the mast cells to not secrete as much histamine. But for some reason, you are in adrenal overdrive so that you are being an overachiever in your histamine production as you produce your adrenal wake-up hormones. So we're going to nurture those at night so that metabolism histamine gets to the tissue more readily. We're going to add metabolism energy in the morning. I would load vitamin C and histamine at night and metabolism histamine and energy in the morning. Let's see if that works and that helps. You might also consider doing a week-long phase 1 super intensive because that will nurture the adrenals and help you be an overachiever in other areas of life as opposed to an overachiever in the secretion of histamine when you wake up in the morning.
Awesome. Thank you. I've written all of this down, and that's the direction I'm heading. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Let's see. Let's get our next question in there. Are you ready?
Yeah, I do have a question. It was really interesting hearing everything that Steve was going through and kind of what the prognosis and diagnosis was for that. My only question around that is, why wouldn't he take something like Zyrtec or a Benadryl before bed or even Claritin, something like that over the counter?
That's a great question. Those drugs and medications are phenomenal for crisis intervention, right? You get bitten by a rattlesnake. We hike a lot. We horseback ride a lot. For our dogs and for ourselves, we carry diphenhydramine, which is the generic form of Benadryl. In an anaphylaxis situation, an EpiPen is epinephrine, right? Which is the opposing hormone to what Steve's secreting, actually. So maybe we just do an EpiPen in the morning. No, I'm just kidding, Steve. But the issue with those is that what they call histamine blockers. So they actually block the receptor site for histamine in the tissue. So think of it like this. Think of you're playing soccer and Benadryl is like the goalie, keeping the soccer ball from getting into the net and the end result being a score. As I said earlier, histamine is secreted in all of our bodies every day. It is so important as part of our immune complex. It is what helps us fight off viruses effectively, respond appropriately with lymphocytes and monocytes and phagocytosis, respond appropriately to bacterial exposure and potential infection. And so long-term use of a histamine blocker can really disrupt your body's immune response when we really, really need it. The other thing is those medications don't purify the blood or the tissue. They don't help the body metabolize the histamine that's kind of pooling in the blood. So what will happen is as they wear off, typically the allergies will become worse and worse. So people until the season, like let's say Russian olive you're reactive to, and that season's prevalent. People say I have to take those medications through the whole season. What we'll notice is that the allergy response can get higher and higher, or you will have secondary symptoms like constipation, joint pain. And people say, well, is that a side effect of the drug? It's not a side effect of the drug. It's a side effect of the pooling of the histamine in the body. The other thing that'll happen and why when you read those side effects is weight gain is one of the symptoms with those histamine blockers. And that again is, remember how I talked about earlier, the power plant that breaks down historical fat, metabolizes cholesterol, relies a lot on the process called methylation. And methylation is how we clear histamine. If you have a ton of pooling of histamine that day after day after day while you're taking your antihistamines just continues to pool, it will monopolize the body's ability to metabolize fat efficiently. So really, it's twofold. One, it makes me nervous that we're tricking the immune system, and we need our immune systems right now. And number two, that excess histamine really, really monopolizes a very important, it's not just about the scale. When we metabolize fat and fat-soluble toxins, we do see the numbers go down on the scale, but we see a significant increase in our health. So that's what we're shooting for here. But that's a great question. Why not just pop an antihistamine? And in crisis intervention, I'm all for it. In health proliferation, it is not the way to go. Katie, what can I answer for you?
Yes, great. Thanks, Haylie. I know you've talked about your struggles with an autoimmune disorder, and I struggle with an autoimmune disorder as well. And I was wondering what you would recommend on a daily basis for someone who struggles with autoimmune disorders.
That's a great question, Katie. And yeah, we have that lovely thing in common. Kind of lending to Elon's question, we talked a lot about methylation and fat loss and methylation and the reduction of fat-soluble toxins. It's really important. There's several nutrients, but two key nutrients that we look at. One is folic acid, and the other is B12 in a methylated form, right? So we look for, go grab your supplement bottles. If you're taking a B vitamin, if you're getting a B injection, if you're taking a multivitamin with B in it, make sure that it says the word methylcobalamin, not cyanocobalamin. Cyanocobalamin is extremely hard for our body to metabolize, and it does not help facilitate the methylation process efficiently. In our supplement world, we use sublingual B12 with folic acid and methylated B12 because it is so difficult to get B efficiently orally. So we like to supplement with a sublingual where it dissolves under the tongue. And again, it kind of keeps me from having to run in and get those B shots. So allergies, there are some people that feel like allergies are part of the autoimmune cascade because the mast cell production, the elevated mast cell production of histamine creates an immune response to the very tissue that is our own body, which that's the definition of autoimmune, right? I have ITP, which means my immune system attacks my own platelets. We shouldn't be doing that, Haylie, right? And Katie, in many other autoimmune diseases, will attack lung tissue, will attack bone marrow, will attack connective tissue. And so allergies, there's a lot of individuals that will see a rheumatologist for their allergies, in which rheumatologists are primarily the docs that they see for autoimmune. So on a daily basis, there's a couple things that I do to keep my allergies from not causing an autoimmune flare. Very diligent about my B12 and folate sublingual tablets. The other thing is, and it's kind of funny because the name doesn't really, to me, describe the power of what's in it, but take the metabolism energy beverage in the morning and at noon. So like I had talked, there is quercetin, which is natural antihistamine. It's a natural anti-inflammatory benefit. But the other thing in it is it has L-arginine and an amino acid called citrulline. These are amino acids that are valet delivery drivers for other key nutrients. So it's a catalyst therapy. It's why it gives energy. It doesn't give energy because it's a stimulus, but it gives energy because it helps deliver nutrients to the powerhouse of the cell called the mitochondria to metabolize things. And byproduct that is ATP, or what we see in our bodies as energy, excess energy to be able to use for other functions. So again, to support methylation, I'm really good with the B12 and the folate and sublingual. And then I know that I talk a lot about taking metabolism energy when I travel. I talk about an oxygen tissue saturation. It's really important because my autoimmune disorder attacks the platelets. Any autoimmune disorder that attacks any tissue in the body, it's really important that we hand deliver nutrients to those tissues because our bodies are otherwise compromised in being able to absorb nutrients. I use the energy because if my eyes are itchy or red, or I go do hair and makeup and there's something, hairspray or things in the room that I'm reactive to, I'm always drinking metabolism energy while I travel for that reason. But I really like that you asked me from an autoimmune perspective. And again, having that amino acid complex with the quercetin that helps the delivery of all other nutrients is kind of an important one for sure for me, and will be for you.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So what's our next question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have Hashimoto's, and I feel like I'm in like a constant state of inflammation to the point where if I'm outside when it's like dust time, I'm like literally running inside, because if I get like a mosquito bite, it like passes and lasts like at least a week, and it's really bad. I also have like problems with sometimes my ring fills can come off perfectly fine, and the next day I can't get it off no matter what. So I feel like I'm in a constant state of inflammation. Is there something I can do to kind of reset my whole body?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So allergies, we all agreed that this is part of the immune complex, right? And your description was perfect. So just so everybody knows, Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disorder. They call it Hashimoto's thyroiditis because Hashimoto's, our bodies create antibodies, again, autoantibodies, where your immune system attacks its own tissue. Hashimoto's thyroiditis, typically it attacks the tissue of the thyroid, although its immune cascade will hyperproduce mast cell production. So typically people with Hashimoto's thyroiditis have per capita, have per cell more mast cells in their tissues. So like you were just talking about, that pustule, that pus response, that swelling response, when you have a reaction, that's because you have more of the cells that light themselves on fire, for lack of a better description, when you have an allergy response, and you can get that strong response. The metabolism free radicals have some really, really key components in it. So we've heard a lot about cytokine storm. In our bodies, we produce, and also COX-2 inhibitors, like when you talk about arthritis medications, there are some metabolic pathways that when the body gets really ramped up and really fired up about having this strong immune response, that get way out of control. And balancing those pathways can take a multi-prong approach. So typically with individuals that are in this state, we have them do at least 14 days of the pain and inflammation protocol. So that uses the metabolism shake, which has a lot of natural vitamin C in it through the food-based things like the spirulina, the kale, the spinach. It has a lot of chlorella in it, which is a very strong and potent vitamin C source. It also has turmeric, which is a fabulous anti-inflammatory. We layer that with the eye burn foods. So a lot of the raw foods like watermelon, again, the spinaches, the kale, the jicamas, and we add in metabolism free radicals. So free radicals have a couple things in it. It's salicin, which is a white willow bark extract, and boswellia, which is an enzyme that actually comes from a pineapple extract. Both of those can nourish and nurture the mast cells to get them to cool their jets. In Hashimoto's specifically, because those antibodies have a really strong affinity for the thyroid, and remember, the thyroid is the powerhouse gland of the metabolism, we can see a lot of swelling, edema, and wild weight gain swings for sure. In an individual like that, I would layer, in an individual like yourself, what you're asking me, I would definitely layer in the metabolism histamine to see if we can kind of cool off the histamine secretion. The metabolism shake works a lot on the liver and adds a lot of food for the methylation process. Remember that power plant? We need to get that histamine level flushed out of your body efficiently. So I would probably also layer in the B12 and folate. You know, I would be taking my vitamin C, and I would probably take that in the PM hours for someone that's in a flare state like this. Again, remember, we rest, we rebuild, and we restore, and we lose weight while we sleep. If we can flood the body with 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C while we sleep, it will help nourish those tissues that house those mast cells, and it will really help reduce that very strong, fiery, inflammatory response. So, you know, I would consider like taking your vitamin C right before bed. I'd probably take your B12 and folate throughout the day to help facilitate the flushing out of this histamine. Remember, bees are water soluble, so it's better to take a couple twice a day as opposed to taking like 5 or 6 at once, like some of my clients like to do because they taste so good. And then I would probably add my histamine. I would add a higher dose again because of the flare state that you're in. I would double my dose at night. I would take my regular dose during the day, and I would sip on the metabolism energy probably twice a day. But I really want you to download that pain and inflammation protocol. Even if you just get the 2 shakes in a day and focus on that food list, it will really, really help. There's 3 things that I always like people to kind of think about that the body has to do when it's getting back into balance. The body has to clear histamine effectively, right? Effectively in the bloodstream and effectively in the tissue. The only way we do this right now is from micronutrients, from foods and supplementation. There is no drug on the planet yet that can help with this. So we want to, one first step is clear the pooled histamine. The second thing that we want to do is rebalance the immune system so that it doesn't see safe things, even the mosquito bite. We want to have a nice, healthy response to that, flush that out. Lymphocytes, that's what the swelling and the redness cause. I actually put metabolism histamine on my bug bites, but we need to rebalance it so that you have a nice, healthy response. And that is going to be by really nourishing those mast cells and the tissues around it. And you guessed it, there is no drug yet to do this. There are immunosuppressants, but again, that becomes very, very scary when we talk about needing our immune system now more than ever, right? So that second stage, that rebalancing immune system we can only do it one way. And you guessed it, that's from micronutrients. It's micronutrient dependent. That metabolic process is micronutrient dependent. The third thing is we need to balance and rebalance the hormones of inflammation and insulin resistance in a body like yours. I believe that the primary thing with this is, you're right, food and supplements. But this is a time too where you could really focus on doing things body work, lymphatic massage, deep tissue massage, acupuncture, sauna, exercise. Remember, we need to strengthen the tissues, the lymphatic tissue, the connective tissue, the subcutaneous tissue right under the skin, the lungs, the nasal passage, the throat, the GI tract. All of those tissues need to be nourished and supported because those tissues are what the stabilization or the stability of those tissues are what determine the functional behavior of an allergy response or the erratic behavior of an allergy response. So those are kinds of the things that we want to think about that our body needs to do. I'm going to open it for anybody have one last question before I kind of wrap things up for our community.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Absolutely.
How do you put it directly onto your bug bite?
Oh, that's a great question. So I do one of 2 things. Sometimes I add a little bit of water and put it on, but if I can, I try to put a little bit of coconut oil and I mix it in coconut oil. And I'll open like 3 or 4 capsules and I'll put it in coconut oil. I try to make it really, really potent. And then I'll put it like in a little jar and I just use it every time I think about it. It really helps. I find it really beneficial. If it's a strong venom like a spider bite, sometimes I'll add a little bit of baking soda to it too, because it has that astringent and pH balancing property. But it works for me better than any of the other. I've actually used it for poison ivy too. It's been really beneficial.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anybody else? Last chance?
I have one more question.
Yes.
Are allergies usually hereditary, or is it something that is environmental that usually triggers it?
So there is a hereditary component this is a great question, in genetic expression of metabolic pathways being compromised. So in my family, I've talked a lot about being homozygous methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase deficient. Let me say that 10 times fast. So what that means is genetically, I have a genetic SNP. I believe this is why I manifested the autoimmune disorder that I did. I also believe that this is why I was kind of had such puny health in my life. And I lost, a significant part of my kidney function. Mast cells also are on the kidneys, just so you know. So I have this genetic SNP that doesn't allow my body to methylate efficiently. There's homozygous, heterozygous, meaning you have both genes for it or you have a singular gene for it. And that's a really inexpensive test to run now. If you're either homo or heterozygous, you can be compromised anywhere from 30% of your efficiency in methylation up to 78% efficiency in your methylation. So your ability to purify histamine, it can have a genetic expression. There's another genetic SNP, which is how you process glutathione, which glutathione helps with liver detox. There's a genetic SNP that we look for that's called superoxide dismutase, or SOD. That genetic SNP can make the liver less efficient in cleaving the histamine into its counterparts. So into our natural antihistamines, into our we do actually have naturally histamine, H1 histamine blockers. If you have that genetic SNP, you can be less efficient in all aspects of liver detoxification. We find those people have alcohol sensitivities. They get flush. Sometimes Pacific Islanders, individuals from China, we find genetically that there is a more propensity towards not being able to use glutathione efficiently, which can cause alcohol allergies. We find it oftentimes also with addiction, because many times, like I said, epinephrine is what's in an EpiPen, right? So when we secrete histamine in our bodies, we get a natural epinephrine when histamine levels get too high, a natural epinephrine secretion, which gives us a hit in the brain of a stimulus, a feel-good stimulus, a little bit of a high actually. Especially with kids, we always ask, what's your favorite foods? What do you crave? And oftentimes in children, they're craving foods that they're actually allergic to, because there's that endorphin response that they get after the histamine levels start to get too high. As we get older, Steve, thank you for mentioning, our epinephrine secretion is almost non-existent. So we just get this nice histamine pool. We get swollen eyes, runny noses, hives, but we don't get the epinephrine hit like kids get when they have allergies. So we need to take EpiPens. No, we need to work on balancing our allergies. So Leilani, there is definitely a genetic component. However, like I was talking about the power plant, if our body is dealing with a lot of fat-soluble toxins, things like food additives, preservatives, dyes, colors, chemicals, perfumes, hairsprays, mascaras that are laden with heavy metals, we get overwhelmed or bombarded by that methylation expectation in our body. So it can be genetically compromised, but it can also be environmentally overloaded. And when that happens, our body is not able to process histamine and excrete histamine as efficiently as possible so it can pool. So I would say it's environmental and genetic. And, I had an interesting analogy when we talk about an allergy to a bee sting all the way to an autoimmune response and the cascade of immune response that happens within that. It's when friend becomes foe, and when we start to, in our body, we're so overwhelmed that everything starts to feel like a villain to our immune system. So the goal here is that we have homeostasis and peace in our body, so that when something of danger comes into our surroundings, we can react appropriately, we can react swiftly, and most importantly, we can react in a way that protects our body and doesn't harm our body. So I hope that helps. Let me just leave you with a couple things to think about, guys. If you have recently gotten a vaccine of any kind, remember that they're designed to modify your immune system. This is the very fundamental principle of how inoculations work, right? So there's the good to that. There's also the part that your body has to reconcile and might need some extra TLC to bring your immune responses back into balance. So if you're participating and partaking in that, I want you to be really diligent about journaling about your body's allergy response, and recognizing that over the next 12 months, as your body cycles through the immune response to this support, that there might be some changes and signals that your body might need to go through a protocol to help nurture the adaptogenic hormones, the histamine secretion, and the immune response. The other thing to think about is if you've been participating in wearing masks often, they've helped filter out a lot of bad things from the environment, not getting into your nose and in your mouth. I personally am an advocate of it. I like when a surgeon that's doing surgery on me has a mask on. However, our body is adaptive. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And this is a new filter that we've never had in our body before, that's also filtering out certain bacteria, certain pollens, certain inhalant allergy substances that maybe in the past we've secreted a small amount of histamine to, we've had no real allergy responses to, but it's been a mechanism in keeping our immune system in homeostasis. So this is different. So it's just anytime we do anything different to our environment, we have to adapt to that new norm. So it's really important that you look for signs that you might need more support. The other thing is, if you've had added stress right now, sudden changes in environment, advancing in age like some of us are, this can really tax the body and slow down or make out of balance the adrenal's ability to respond, to secrete histamine, to metabolize histamine, to flush histamine, to have an appropriate immune response. We don't want no immune response. We don't want zero cortisol. We don't want zero histamine. We want just the perfect amount to make our body's immune system healthy and effective. If you're taking a histamine blocker, strive towards balancing the body so that we don't have to block those receptor sites, because histamine is a valuable player in the immune response. So think about metabolizing that and flushing it through your bloodstream. Always be in awe of your body. Remember, allergies are part of the immune system. The immune system is vital in our survival. More importantly, a healthy immune system is critical in us being healthy, happy, and having an abundance of energy. So I hope this was helpful, and please make sure that you ask tons of questions in our membership community. We love to hear from you, and let's see if we can use Kleenex to wipe dirt off the floor and not need it anymore for our precious noses. All right, guys, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it, and I hope this helps all of you on your journey to health and wellness.
Thank you for listening to another inspiring episode of Power on Your Plate with Haylie Pomroy. Please remember to share the amazing science and tools with someone you love. The more we know, the more we all lift our global health together. Visit www.hayliepomroy.com to get notes from today's show and to take your education and health to a new level of success and happiness.
Information on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for the advice provided by your physician or other healthcare professional, or any information contained on or in any product label or packaging. You should not use the information on this podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease, or prescribing any medication or other treatment. You should always speak with your physician or other healthcare professional before taking any medication or nutritional, herbal, or homeopathic supplement, or adopting any treatment for a health problem. If you have or suspect that you have a medical problem, promptly contact your healthcare provider. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking professional advice because of something you've heard on this podcast. Information provided on this podcast and the use of any products or services purchased as a result of this podcast does not create any type of professional relationship between you and any of the associates affiliated with this podcast. Information and statement regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.